Second day of 10.4 is focusing on what we call extraneous solutions. Yesterday we learned how to work with basic level radical equations. These were the types of equations we looked at. The reason we consider those to be basic level is because we recognize that the variable in each of these, even when there are two variables, every variable is underneath the radical. So there aren't any tricks really to look out for, and so we just kind of solved it and we trusted our answers, and that was it. Today what we're going to do is we're going to consider working with extraneous solutions. Extraneous solutions are solutions that pop up as a result of our algebra but don't work when we check them in the original problem. You should always check for extraneous solutions, and that is whenever there is a variable on the inside and, the key word is and, outside of a radical sign. If you remember doing absolute value work, you should also check anytime there's a variable inside the absolute value and outside the absolute value, because typically something weird happens whenever you have that work go on. Examples: tell which solutions, if any, are extraneous. Again, this is a question that you're going to see on your homework. In this situation, they solved the question for you, and they just want to check to see if you know how to see if it's extraneous or not. So all you have to do is take your answer and plug it in. So negative parentheses negative 11 equals square root of negative parentheses negative 11 plus 110. And so all you honestly have to do after you write that is simplify. That would be 11. Then we take this thing here and go square root of negative parentheses negative 11 close plus 110, and we see that we get the answer of 11. Notice how that matches. That means that negative 11 is a good solution. But when we go to check 10, we get negative parentheses 10 equals square root of negative parentheses 10 plus 110. Again, on this side we end up with negative 10. On that side we end up with square root of negative parentheses 10 plus all that gives me the answer of 10. And so if you notice, this does not work, which means that 10 is what we call extraneous, because it did not work. Alright? So again, if you're asked to find out which one's extraneous, that is all it's asking you to do, is to pretty much plug it in and try to find out if anything doesn't work, because it doesn't always have to be like that. Tell which solutions, if any, are extraneous. Again, in this situation, they gave you a problem here. So what we do is we take our n, we plug it in, we put square root of 5 times 2 minus 6. We type in square root of 5 times 2 minus 6. We get the answer of 2. That solution works. We try 3, so we get 3 equals square root of 5 times 3 minus 6. We check out 5 times 3 minus 6 under the root. We get the answer of 3. So in that situation, no solutions are extraneous, because both solutions worked. Again, you never know what's going to happen, but what you should always do whenever you have a variable on the inside and outside is check them, because if you don't, you run the risk of giving two answers and there's really only one, or you run the risk of giving one answer when there's actually none. So if we're actually going to solve this, again, this is on the inside and outside, there's really no way to avoid trying to get rid of this by squaring both sides. So what we have to do is square both sides here. This turns into x squared. The square always cancels the root, giving us 6x plus 16. Now that we have an x squared and an x, if you remember this from chapter 9, I believe it was, you now have to move everything over to one side. So we subtract 6x, we subtract 16. From both sides, those two things cancel. You end up with x squared minus 6x minus 16 equals 0. Again, using algebra, I move my 6x and my 16 over. And the way I do this now is to solve by factoring. So I'm looking for numbers that multiply to be negative 16. Add to be negative 6. The numbers I think about are 2 and 8. Again, I'm doing this because if you need help on factoring, you need to go and watch that video again, or just come up and ask for assistance. But you need to have something down for me to help you out. The fact that the 6 is negative means that the 8 should be negative. The fact that it multiplies and make negative 16 means my 2 should be positive. So my answers are x plus 2 and x minus 8 equals 0. Remember then that we solve it by going x plus 2 equals 0 or x minus 8 equals 0. You solve this by using the algebra that we know. We get the answer of x equals negative 2. we get the answer of x equals 8. We then have to solve it, or check it, because again there's a variable inside and outside, so we want to check it. Plugging in the negative 2, you end up with negative 2 equals square root of 6 times negative 2 plus 16. So again, checking that out, just type in the other side, square root of 6 times negative 2 plus 16 gives me the answer of 2. And this is what we end up with, which means that negative 2 is not a solution. But checking 8, we get 8 equals square root of 6 parentheses 8 plus 16. So we check that in our work there. We get the answer of 8, which means my answer is just x equals 8. It is not x equals 8 and x equals negative 2. It's just x equals 8 because, as we saw, negative 2 does not work. Alright. And then the last example we're looking at here is x equals negative 7x minus 12. So we go through here and we, again, the only thing we can do right now is get rid of the root. So we square both sides. We get x squared equals negative 7x, minus 12. Because we have an x squared and an x, we have to move those to one side. So we add 7x and we add 12 to both sides. That cancels those two things out and moves them over to the left, where we end up with x squared plus 7x plus 12 equals 0. We are then looking for numbers that multiply to be 12, add to be 7. Those numbers that I know of are 3 and 4. They are both positive. And so we take those numbers, we put them into our answer here. So x plus 3, x plus 4 equals 0. We then solve. X plus 3 equals 0. X plus 4 equals 0. Of course, we know this means that x is negative 3, and we understand that this means x equals negative 4. To check for my extraneous solutions, I simply plug them in. But here's the common sense side of it. If I have negative 3 equals negative 7 times negative 3 minus 12, is there any way I take the square root of a number and get a negative 3? Let's see, square root of 16 is positive. Square root of negative 16 doesn't work because there's no numbers that multiply to be a negative. So once you see that you have a square root equals a negative, it's pretty much extraneous, which also means that if you plug in negative 4 to your solution in the original part, sorry, that should be a minus. Again, there's no way I type that in and get a negative 4. But just to show you, square root of negative 7 parentheses negative 3 minus 12 is probably going to be a 3, but it's not 3. And just like the other one, if you check your negative 4, so second enter, remember, brings up the stuff again, you get the answer of 4, but not a negative 4, which means in this case there is no solution. And so you need to make sure you check that, because if you don't, you're going to get caught up answering something that is not true and thinking that there's either one solution or two solutions, and you don't want to miss points for that. So other than that, go to your Math Excel, go ahead and ask as many questions as you need to get ready, and remember, you have a quiz tomorrow. Good luck.